Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulika al-kareem. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Ya Allah anta halimun kareemun azeemun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anna ya kareem. Allahumma iftah lana abwaab rahmatik. Allahumma iftah lana abwaab rahmatik ya kareem. Bismillah. Inshallah, we continue mapping Suratul Baqara, and my hope is that next time you recite Suratul Baqara, you have a mental map of the various rooms of this majestic palace. And we stopped at the creation of Adam alayhi salam last time. And you will recall that I mentioned that this surah was revealed in Medina. This means 13 years have passed since the first revelation. And this is really a long journey for the community, those who entered Islam at the beginning of the revelation, endured hardships for 13 long years before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened what really is a transforming event, not just in the history of Muslims, but in the history of humanity. The history of the world transformed, changed on the day when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted the permission to the Prophet ﷺ to migrate to Medina, which was Yathrib. A fascinating aspect of the Qur'an, of course, is that it transcends time and place of its revelation, while simultaneously addressing the existing reality of the time of revelation. This is such a unique aspect of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is sometimes overlooked or poorly understood. Every single ayah of the Quran, every single word of the Quran, obviously it came down at a certain place at a certain time. And as we are dealing with Suratul Baqarah came in Medina as Muslims arrived there. And it directly addresses what was going on. But at the same time, it transcends that time and that place. There is absolutely no other book in the world that has this unique simultaneous totality at two levels. The first level is what I just mentioned, that while addressing the situation of the time, it transcends that time and that place, not only just time and place, but also the circumstances, everything that is connected with the actual ground reality of that time. And the second simultaneous totality, that second aspect of simultaneous totality that I have mentioned several times, is the presence of the fundamental themes of the Quran in every given section of the Quran. And you will recall that the three fundamental themes that Imam al-Ghazali had mentioned in Jawahir al-Quran are Tawheed, Risala, and Ma'ad. We will, inshallah, continuously refer to these themes as we proceed. With the mapping of this surah, it helps to deepen our understanding of the surah, and it also helps to clear certain misconceptions, certain efforts which have been made in the last century. And I want to without taking away the merits of the people who have made those efforts, I want to comment on two of them before we proceed, because we are going to go deeper into the thematic map of Suratul Baqara, like we will, inshallah, every time we come to a surah, we will do this. So it is important to refer to previous attempts to produce a thematic map of the surah. And what I have in mind, two specific instances. One is this Tadabbur Qur'an, which furthers the work of Hamiduddin Farahi, who didn't write a full tafsir, but he wrote fundamental works in the subcontinent on the Quran. And Hamiduddin Farahi left behind a student, Amin Hassan Islahi, who produced this tafsir to the Quran. There is a history to these efforts, and one has to know the entirety of that history. One has to know what was happening in the Indian subcontinent in 1925, when Hamiduddin Farahi received a student, young Amin Hassan Islahi, and he asked him, "Are you going to waste your life in journalism and poetry, or are you going to do something worthwhile?" And so he took him under his wings and passed on his own knowledge and tadabbur, reflections on the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to him. His main effort was to find amud, a vertical axis in every surah. And this goes back, of course, centuries, where we have our scholars trying to understand the internal coherence of the Quran. And this is the nazm of the Quran. Coherence is very poor translation of nazm. A nazm is when things are connected dot to dot, and the overall picture is bigger than the dots. And what is that nazm in the Quran? There are very few works in our tradition. People didn't really feel the need before the modern times to write works on what we now call coherence of the Quran. And this effort was primarily made as a reaction to some of the criticism that came from the Orientalists and missionaries and others who said, well, this book is very strange. We cannot understand it. We are reading an ayah about fasting, and suddenly it starts to talk about marital relationships. What is it? We don't get it. And this was mostly the Western mind. Western mind, by Western mind, I don't mean just Western in the geographical sense, but people who are deeply steeped in the Aristotelian tradition that seeks logical connections at the surface, at the level of outward manifestation. So when when you are in school, they teach you, well, write an essay on such and such topic, and every essay has a beginning, it has a middle part, and then it has a final part. And we keep teaching that slavishly as well, even now, to our children. Well, write a story, and the story has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an ending. This particular aspect of connections and overall scheme in a given story, essay, and in this case in the surahs of the Quran, is very superficial effort to produce a structure that is steep in logic that Aristotle primarily promoted. And that's why when I said Western tradition, as I said, I don't mean just geographically speaking, but anybody whose mind works at this strict rational intellectual frame where connections can only be made in a serial logical way. These are very important. I'm using these words carefully. Serial logical way. The Quran addresses the entirety of insan, of human beings, not just the mind. So in order to just have functionality, we need to have serial logical connections. We cannot even speak to each other without that, without becoming incomprehensible. In operational matters, we need to have serial logical connections, driving, buying things, etc. But the Quran is not really addressing the intellect. It's addressing the entirety of its reader, psychological, emotional, spiritual, and the deep-seated, very deep-seated nafs, anything that is, it just impacts. If we read it carefully, every single ayah of the Quran impacts the entirety of our being if we are paying attention to it. So when people like Hamiduddin Farahi came across these criticism by the missionaries, and even in their own attempts, without referring too much to the missionaries, although this is obviously a reaction to the huge missionary activity that was going on in the 19th century and early parts of the 20th century in the entirety of the Muslim world. They said, no, the Quran is coherent. And what was the scheme that they came up with? They said that there is a vertical axis of every surah, and everything is connected to that vertical axis. And then they said that every surah has connections with the previous surah and the next surah. So this is how a very poor translation of the surah is chapter, and chapters are conceived in a book which are logically moving from one chapter to the next chapter. We proceed that way. So Hamiduddin Farahi, and then following him, Amin Hassan Islahi. So the Quran is like they just have that with every surah. What is the connection of this surah with the previous and with the next surah? There is some merit to it. I'm not saying that there is no merit to it. There are surahs, but because this is an artificial attempt, because everyone knows that the surahs didn't come one after the other as they are present in the current Musaf. So this is artificial in the sense of producing a level of coherence based on the arrangement of the surahs, which of course is divine as well. It's inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Quran is not a book of chapters. Quran is a collection of 114 surahs revealed over a period of 23 years at different times. So this is my brief introductory remark about the attempt by Farahi and Islahi, and their whole school is based on that. For instance, they say that the vertical axis or the main subject of Suratul Baqara is Dawat Iman. This is Amin Hassan Islahi saying that this is the invitation to Iman. And he connects Suratul Baqara with Suratul Fatiha by saying that although Fatiha also contains this dawa, this invitation, but it was very brief there. And in this surah, that has been given a much more detailed treatment. And because the invitation came through the Prophet ﷺ, therefore this surah Baqarah is Iman bil Risala. Iman bil Risala. And as we proceed to say that this surah is the central topic of this surah is invitation to Iman. Right? One can say that about every surah of the Quran, every ayah of the Quran. As Imam al-Ghazali, he said that the sir, the deepest secret of the Quran, the innermost, the lubab, the innermost kernel of the Quran is that this is an invitation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his creation. So the entirety of the Quran is an invitation. And so to say that Suratul Baqara is an invitation doesn't really make it any specific. The second brief comment that I want to make is on what is really a very poor work by Muhammad al-Ghazali, Egyptian. He passed away. And this again, I'm saying that, one doesn't want to say too much because these people have their own merits. They have produced tremendous amount of effort to invite people to the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to Islam. So nevertheless, we are dealing, this is, we don't have our loyalty to people. We have our loyalty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to his book and to his prophet. And we are limited in our understanding. Nevertheless, when things are very clear, one has thought through what one has read. In our tradition, we have this necessity to correct when correction is needed. So Muhammad al-Ghazali, who was born in 1917 and he died in 1996. And again, this is a general characteristic. Those who know me, I know I'm very careful about the about the modern period because of the impact. And this impact of colonization that produced responses is very strong in Egypt, in the Indian subcontinent, and in the Maghreb, like our Maghreb, Aljazair and Marrakesh, and like those places were totally destroyed. Wherever the French went, they totally destroyed our deen, tradition, and uprooted people. They couldn't destroy Islam, of course, but they destroyed people. Just like the Russians did. But the Russians, at least they were cruel. Communism came and they said, no, you cannot practice Islam or any religion. People went underground and they survived. But the French, they just cut the roots off. So we have a huge, huge gap in our brothers and sisters in the Maghreb. And in Turkey, we try to do it ourselves. Mustafa Kamal, he just threw ulama from the helicopters, and it was a huge effort. But look what's happening. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our protector. Turkey is becoming the center of scholarship. So Allah knows. Anyways, this Muhammad al-Ghazali, he produced a thematic commentary on the Quran and the English translation is extremely poor, but the original Arabic is no better. And there is this underlying impact of colonization, where especially when it comes to women, one of the most important force that was there, that has been there, is to challenge us to say, well, your Islam has a very poor concept of women, and therefore you treat women so poorly, and your book is like this, and you allow 4 wives, but you don't allow 4 husbands, and all the rest of it. And Egypt was in the midst of that. So in his thematic commentary on Suratul Baqara, I don't want to say too much again, but this is very poor, extremely poor in terms of the outlook and what is said. So with this preamble, let's turn our attention to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and map out this hump of the Qur'an, as our Prophet, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him rest and peace and increase his stations. So we identified the first theme being the kitab itself. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So the very first ayah has the theme centered on the book itself, and then this book is the guidance, so the theme of guidance, and muttaqeen. This is the guidance for muttaqeen, and muttaqeen, we said last time, that's another sub-theme. And then it defines 3 kinds of people, and then we have the next section dealing with Tawheed and why we need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we have the our own story. What happened when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the first human being. That's where we stop. Now we come to a section that is really central in this surah. And this is the story of Bani Israel. Bani Israel are the most mentioned people in the Quran. The most mentioned people in the Quran. And this section is a concentrated account of their dealings and their history, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dealing with them. So this is really something that we should pay attention to when we recite the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is an article on children of Israel in the 2nd volume, inshallah. And this article is really, it's 40 years of reflection. And every time I have read this part, I've always felt that there is a charge sheet. There's a charge sheet. There is a divine charge sheet on Bani Israel. And when I was writing this article, I actually ended up listing specific 1, 2, 3, 4 numbered charges that this is what they did. And this, like next time you read just this very beginning of Ya Bani Israel azkuru ni'mati allati anamtu alaykum wa awfu bi ahdi Ufi biyahdikum wa iyaya farhabun. Ya bani Israel azkuru ni'mati allati anamtu alaykum. Like these first words, they are repeated in the same surah. They are just so powerful. O children of Israel, remember my blessings upon you, anamtu alaykum, that I blessed you with. And this section beginning with this ayah number 40, it's a long section, but it's not the entirety of the Quranic treatment of children of Israel. And of course, again, as always the case, within this section, you would find that there are sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inserts some other ayahs. And but overall, this section is dealing with their history and what they have said. And the beauty of this section is that time is totally broken. The weight of the narrative is such that it's not a serial chronological account of their history. There is no such thing in the Quran, because the Quran deals with something much deeper than the surface level connections. So if you look at this account, for instance, when we come to this place where the time suddenly moves 4,000 years, like it just comes to the time of revelation itself. It begins with what happened to Fir'aun and what he was doing to Bani Israel, and then it just tells the believers, وَلَن تَرْضَى عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. Yahud and Nasara are not going to be happy with you. They're not going to be pleased with you until you follow their millah. And it refers to Ibrahim alayhi salam in this section. So these are like ayah 121. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is definitely connected with them, with Yahud and with Nasara and with us. He is the one who made the dua. Rabbana وابعث فيهم رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياتك ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة ويزكيهم إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. So we have this dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam resulting in the coming of the Prophet alayhi salam. This is the dua. It only took 4,000 years. SubhanAllah. So when we say that this surah is like a majestic palace, one of the rooms of this palace is children of Israel, Bani Israel. Another room is Ibrahim alayhi salam. And of course, here one really, when we try to comprehend the themes and the topics of this surah, our efforts just start to dwindle and fail, because, as I said, this particular section which deals with the Bani Israel branches off time and again into other fundamental themes of the Quran. Risala, for instance, itself, prophethood. It refers to previous prophets. It refers to the fact that guidance is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how are we going to say, okay, this section does this and this section does this? It's like going into a room, but carrying all the rooms with us. So it's just that kind of structure. When we begin the second juz of the Quran, which is the ayah number 142 of Suratul Baqara, سَيَقُولُ السُّفَهَاءُ مِنَ النَّاسِ مَا وَلَّاهُمْ عَنْ قِبْلَتِهِمُ الَّتِي كَانُوا عَلَيْهَا قُلْ لِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. This is the famous incident of the change of Qibla. And the deepening of this understanding, thematic understanding of the surah, produces deepening of individual ayahs and individual sections of the surah. Because, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed right from the beginning, because everything in His knowledge right from the beginning, that He would change the Qibla at some point, at a given time. He would change the Qibla. But you know, the historical importance of this is that Qibla, first Qibla being Jerusalem, and Yahud and Nasara following them, it was the alignment with their direction, with them. The Prophet ﷺ arrives in Medina. He invites them. He is very much looking forward to their acceptance, because it's written in their books that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to send him. Quraysh are story of the past. These are people of the book. And they are established, they're well established there in Yathrib, what was Yathrib. And you know what happened. Now, Qibla is changed. They say it's a year and 8 months into Hijrah, meaning it took 18 months after they had been there. And suddenly there are objections. There are objections. Why are you changing your direction of prayer? There aren't too many of those objections mentioned in the Quran, but elsewhere we know what happened. And even for Muslims, it was hard, because, you know, our concept is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constant. He doesn't change. Of course, He doesn't change, but He decreed. And this change in Qibla was also a test for Muslims. Like for us, it's second nature. But imagine the first generation, people who are praying in a certain direction, and suddenly they are asked to change their Qibla. So it was a test for them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had His wisdom in it. there are lots of legal rulings in this surah. And one more time, we cannot just go through ayah by ayah and say now the legal rulings are starting. This section deals with legal rulings. No, they are widespread, they are spread throughout the surah. But it is possible, and it has been done, to gather all the legal rulings, how to fast, how to do Hajj, what are the other rulings connected with the fasting, and with Salah, and with Hajj, like all the fundamentals are there. It's possible to gather all of them, and it has been done. So that would be one room of this surah. What are we going to eat from the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has produced? What is halal and what is haram? What kind of meat and what is required to slaughter an animal? So we have lots of ahkam, and interspread with that, of course, is the continuous reminder from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about his invitation to us. He doesn't need our prayers, he doesn't need our fasting, he doesn't need anything from us. But when he says do this, fast, it's for us to purify ourselves. And there are many ayahs which, inshallah, we will go through them, which also reverse the widespread practice that was there at that time. And there is a constant correction of ibadat. There is a constant correction of what had been modified. So one example that just came here is لَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَبْتَغُوا فَضْلًا مِّن رَّبِّكُمْ فَإِذَا أَفَضْتُم مِّنْ عَرَفَاتٍ فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ عِندَ الْمَشْعَرِ الْحَرَامِ وَاذْكُرُوهُ كَمَا هَدَاكُمْ وَإِن كُنتُم مِّن قَبْلِهِ لَمِنَ الضَّالِّينَ. Like these are the ahkam of the Hajj, which come 199 ayah, 200. The Quraysh, and they had made it so the Hajj was, of course, there. They did Hajj as well, following Ibrahim alayhi salam's sunnah that was left behind. But they had distorted everything. They had distorted even the Hajj. And they said, oh, we don't need to go to Arafah. We are the people of the house. It's only for the outsiders who need to go to Arafah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrected all of those things which they had changed. Questions arose. This is a community in the making. This is the first time in human history that a Sharia is going to be established. And this is happening in real time. And by that I mean there were practices already in place. Every society has history. The history of Yathrib and of Makkah and the people in general in that area. What are we going to do about drinking? What are we going to do about bets? So yasalunaka, yani there are very, these ayahs are very important because they ask you, yasalunaka, they ask you anil khamr wal maisir. They ask you about khamr, which is intoxicants. وَيَسَأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ. What shall we spend? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, spend in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they said, what shall we spend? And these were genuine questions. These were questions from the common believers who wanted to follow the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they had questions about how to follow. So all the ayahs, وَيَسَأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيدِ, all the ayahs beginning with yasalunaka, if someone was to, and this has already been done again, someone collects all the ayahs beginning with yasalunaka, they ask you, and that in itself will become beautiful, is a beautiful room, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed certain ayahs in response to questions. And this is how he had decreed that he would tell people, spend in my cause, and then people would say, what shall we spend? People will ask about salah, people will ask about women, people will ask about marriage, people would ask about divorce, people would ask about real questions. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would respond to those real questions. So all the ahkam that are present here, like when somebody dies, what to do, and what is the duration for a woman to, after the husband's death, to remarry, all of these things, they form the legal core of this surah. Remember that in the descriptions we did last time of the surah, there was a mention that the greatest ayah of the Qur'an is in this surah, and this is Ayatul Kursi. Allah la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard man dhal ladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi idhnihi ya'lamu ma bayna aydihim wa ma khalfahum wa la yuhituna bi shay'in min ilmihi illa bima sha'a wasi'a kursiyyuhu as-samawati wal ard wa la ya'uduhu hifdhuhuma wa huwal Aliul Azim. This ayah is Ayatul Kursi. So that in itself is a room of this palace, Ayatul Kursi, and within Ayatul Kursi is called the greatest ayah of the Quran because the description of Allahu la ilaha illahu al-hayyul qayyum. We will inshallah go into deeper study of the ayah, but right now I just want to mention that in our thematic understanding of the overall message of the surah, this ayah stands out and is by itself a room. La ikraha fid deen. Another room is La ikraha fid deen. There is no coercion in deen. Now this is a very multidimensional ayah. What does it mean when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there is no coercion in religion? And how does that work in real life? what does it mean to say that there is no ikrah? Inshallah, we'll go to the details. Subhanallah. Allah waliyul lazina amanu yukhrijuhum min az-zulumat ila an-nur wal lazina kafaru awliyahum at-taghut yukhrijunahum min an-nur ila az-zulumat ulaika ashabun nar hum fiha khalidun. The descriptions of nur, of light and darkness, these are present throughout the Quran. And there are many aspects of these light and darkness. Kufr is darkness, Iman is light, Nur, and I think I mentioned this before. Zulumat is always plural. Darkness is always plural in the Quran. And Nur, light, is singular. And there is a reason for it. You reflect on it, on the darkness. There can be several different kinds of darknesses. There's the darkness of oppression, there is the darkness of ignorance, there is the darkness of kufr, of disbelief, many kinds of darknesses, whereas light is just light. This surah is actually, because it's a long surah and it came over a time, and this surah actually contains what is said to be the last ayah that was revealed as well of the Quran. So inshallah we will, when that ayah comes, we will see the context. And finally we have the last two ayahs. These are very special ayahs. All ayahs of the Quran are special, but there are certain ayahs which are singled out because of the special fadl, special bounties, special blessings which come when we recite those. And the last two ayahs of Suratul Baqara are those ayahs which are singled out. And inshallah, we'll spend time when we come to them. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us tawfiq, ability, life, and we pray that He accepts what we are doing on these Sunday mornings. May He grant us tawfiq and ability to deepen and our knowledge and act upon what we learn. So are there any questions about the thematic mapping of the surah? If not, then inshallah we will begin the study of this surah next time, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us the ability to do so, with Alif Lam Mim. And these are muqattiyat. These are letters which are not connected. They are letters. And this in itself is a branch of sciences of the Quran. And there are various opinions, including the opinion that don't say anything about them. But scholars have said things about them. So, inshallah, we will try to understand. what has been said. And one more time, we are not saying anything from ourselves. We don't qualify. We don't have the qualifications. We are presenting, inshallah, what is in our tradition. It's an ocean. It's really a beautiful ocean. It's very good to dive into it and connect. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. يا الله أنت حليم كريم عظيم تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.